course of the past 4 weeks, we've come to realize that human behavior is at its best boundedly rational. At its worst, it's a bit of a mess. How do we help people who clearly have a deficiency in making optimal decisions to make better choices? Let's draw a simple analogy between a cognitive deficiency and a physical deficiency. I once broke my leg, and when I thought about how to best help myself get around from place to place, I realized that there are two kinds of strategies that we typically use to help people with physical deficiencies. The first strategy is to actually support physical movement. We do that by providing people with a crutch, with an assisted device, with a wheelchair or a walker. The second thing we need to do is to make sure that the context or the environment in which they move around is a safe environment and it is easy for people to walk around or move around in that environment. And if we apply that same analogy to a cognitive deficiency, we'll again see that there are two kinds of ways in which we can help people make better decisions. A crutch approach, which simply means giving them the tool to make better choices, and a choice architecture approach or a context approach, which is designing environments where in fact they are steered towards the right choice. Over the next little bit, we're going to focus our attention on the second of these strategies, which is to design the right environment, and we'll focus on how to come up with processes for designing nudges. Now, before we actually get into the design of nudges, there are a few things we need to keep in mind, and in particular, there are 5 ideas that I want us to focus on. The first piece of advice that I would give is simply this: know your tools. Just like any plumber does before he or she starts a new job, or any carpenter or any mason, you want to make sure you understand exactly how many hammers and spanners and wrenches you have in your disposal. What are these tools? These tools are twofolds: an understanding of the common mistakes that people make in their decision-making process, and an understanding of things we could do to correct those mistakes. We've already looked at a number of phenomena: mental accounting, choice over time, choice overload, and so on and so forth. And in the next module, we'll actually review a lot of these tools with a view to understanding exactly what are the different kinds of strategies we could use to help people make better choices. Second, before you start designing your nudge intervention, you want to make sure you know exactly what behavior you want to change. Now, this is a tricky process. Sometimes we can define behavior change at a very broad level. For example, I want people to eat more healthy food. Or you could say something like, I want for people's savings rates to go up. But if you think about it, each of these outcomes has a number of specific actions that need to happen to make that outcome true. For example, how do I get people to save more money? Well, I need for them to actually open a retirement account. I need for them to make sure that they're monitoring that retirement account and that they're reviewing and constantly making changes as a function of changes in the environment as well as their own income. Likewise, if I want people to increase their recycling behavior, there are a few specific things that I need to do. So when you think about a nudge intervention, you want to make sure you are very precise in terms of what exactly you want to happen as a result of the nudge. For example, do I want people that currently have a bank account to save more, or do I want more people to open bank accounts? These are two very, very different outcomes, but they might both result in the same grand outcome, which is an increase in the savings rates. Third, clean up your pipes. What does that mean? Think about the following simple example. Let's imagine I have a problem where I run a call center where people call me for help on how to save money. Let's say it's a financial literacy center, and I notice that there are a lot of dropped calls. There are dropped calls because people call in, they wait for a period of time, their calls don't get answered, and then they hang up. I could think about a number of interesting behavioral strategies to keep those people in the line. For example, I could play music, I could give them information about how many people are ahead of them in the call, or I could give them some other distraction task to keep them engaged in the process. However, if I have a faulty process for actually answering the calls, then these interventions are not going to play a big role. For example, suppose I have no triaging system where a caller calls in, reports the kind of information they need, and then their calls get directed to one of 5 different agents. If that doesn't happen, then the wait times are going to be incredibly large to begin with. And so what you really need to do is to make sure that your processes for delivering the service are as good as they can be before you nudge people into doing what you want them to do. Having a clean pipe allows the nudging intervention to work as best as it can. Having a clogged pipe reduces the effectiveness of the nudging intervention. So simple advice, make sure your processes are as good as they can possibly be. Fourth, keep in mind that eventually you're going to need to experiment. Once you come up with a nudge, once you come up with an intervention, you need to be able to assign people to a control condition, some other people to the treatment condition, and then to be able to test for the effectiveness of the nudge. And so make sure that you have all of the processes in place that will allow you to come up with that particular experiment. And fifth, ask yourself the question, is nudging indeed the best option here? Are there other alternatives? Is it the case that perhaps an economic incentive is better than a nudging incentive? As we said before, it is always a mistake to think about the four strategies of behavioral changes as competing against each other. We need to think about having them collaborate to make sure that we end up with the kinds of outcomes that we want. Remember we said that outcomes like increasing financial well-being have multiple components? Perhaps some of those components are best dealt with by an economic intervention. Perhaps others are best dealt with by using persuasion, and yet others are dealt best by using a nudging strategy. It is important for us to think through which is the best fit for each one before designing a nudging strategy. And finally, let me again emphasize the importance of clearly identifying the behavior that you want to change. You want to make sure that the behavior that you identify is simple, it is easy to observe, and in fact, it can be measured easily so that you can experiment with it. Once you've come to the work area, you've cleaned up your pipes, and you know what your tools are, you are now ready to begin the process of designing nudges.